Yeah, it's complicated, obviously. These are historic, long-time rivalries between different groups in the south-west of Syria, Bedouins, the Druze community, and it led to an unfortunate situation and a misunderstanding, it looks like, between the Israeli side and the Syrian side. So we've been engaged with them all morning long and all night long with both sides, and we think we're on our way towards a real de-escalation and then hopefully get back on track in helping Syria build a country and arriving at a situation there in the Middle East is far more stable. So in the next few hours, we hope to see some real progress to end what you've been seeing over the last couple hours.
Okay, well, that was Secretary of State Marco Rubio commenting on this latest round of violence or cycle of violence within Syria. Hello and welcome to State of Play on MintPress News. Today we turn, of course, to Syria. Luckily, a non-controversial topic at all. That was sarcasm if you're just listening to the audio podcast. And unpack the madness and contradictions that have unfolded amidst this latest cycle of violence that broke out between Druze and Bedouin tribesmen over the past few days. Then the government forces got involved, which led to more violence. Then Israel used its long-standing doctrine of the periphery to escalate violence even further by bombing a military headquarters and governmental building in Damascus to show who's boss. All right, thanks so much, y'all. We're going to just lot to cover with Syria. So today we are joined for our Thursday episode on State of Play by a MintPress News staff writer, Robert Inlakesh, who has lived in the occupied Palestinian territories and is one of my favorite regional commentators on stuff regarding West Asia. And then Ahmad from Prop & Co. He's a journalist and activist who I was just with during the Trump military pride parade, Mussolini pride parade in D.C., talking to MAGA people. So he also does work with Max Blumenthal, and I've been liking your stuff, man. Thanks so much for coming on again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, Syria. So, guys, just strap in for like the monologue, and then we're just going to open up and see where the conversation goes, because there's actually like too much to cover here to really plot it out within an hour. So we're just going to see what we get to, and we're going to cover the main points. But real quick, I just wanted to talk about Israeli political and military doctrines, because once they're like put in place, they never really change. You got the Da'iya doctrine, the collective punishment of civilians in order to pressure for diplomatic concessions, which they're actively using in Gaza, and then Lebanon too, as well. And then you've got like the Hannibal Directive, Samson, all these doctrines were put in place a long time ago, and they're still here. So I just want to talk about the doctrine of the periphery. It's kind of transmuted over, the past few decades, but it's an Israeli foreign policy strategy that involves cultivating relations with non-Arab and non-Muslim countries and populations within countries in the Middle East and beyond as a way to counter potential threats from hostile Arab states. This approach, initially developed in the 50s during Ben-Gurion's day, aimed to create alliances and partners with nations perceived as being on the, quote, periphery of the Arab world, thus bolstering Israel's security and influence. Israel sought alliances with countries like Turkey, Iran, and of course, Israel and Iran have had a long-standing intelligence relationship, even though they beef publicly. We're going to talk about Erdogan and why you shouldn't really pay too much attention to his bluster about Israeli impunity. It also included Imperial Iran before the revolution under the Shah, Ethiopia, as well as minority groups like the Kurds and Druze in Syria and Maronite Christians in Lebanon. And yesterday, of course, we just saw U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio characterize Israeli aggression in Syria as a misunderstanding. It is not, for many reasons. We could talk about Netanyahu's corruption trial being postponed, the messianic vision of a greater Israel, factionalism within IDF defense circles. But the current purpose of the doctrine of periphery is to use the supposed defense of minority groups around its borders to justify adventurous military and destabilizing operations against its neighbors. So no actors in this Syria drama really want to see Syria become a sovereign nation, and Robert's really going to get into that. Israel continues to dismantle its military infrastructure, obviously, with the strikes earlier this week. Qatar and Turkey have cleared its debt with the World Bank so it can take out significant IMF loans, debt traps, and the U.S. has given the green light to those countries to invest $7 billion in Syria's energy grid. It will become a neo-colony, or a failed state at this rate. If Syria seems overwhelming and confusing to you, I repeat the following until it all makes sense. It's a bit reductive, but Israel is an extension of the American empire to conduct adventurous wars and destabilizing operations to carve West Asia into vassal states that will allow their people and resources to be exploited by the transnational capitalist class and security elite. And so part of the transnational elite includes, policymakers in Gulf states like Qatar and longtime intelligence collaborator Turkey to the north, who is not even trying to expand its influence, who's not just trying to expand its influence in Syria, but also in Lebanon, eyeing the deep water port in Tripoli. So real quick, I think we should basically just give I've got another couple minutes to just lay out kind of what happened in broad detail, and then we're just really going to get into it. So according to Axios News, the Trump administration, this was reporting late last night, has asked Israel to halt its strikes on Syrian government targets and to open direct talks with Damascus. U.S. officials are highly concerned that the Israeli attacks, including on Syrian military headquarters in Damascus and near the presidential palace, could destabilize the new Syrian government, which they're trying to get into SWIFT, which they're offering sanctions relief for policy compliance. The officials said in the past 48 hours could seriously undermine progress towards a new security agreement between Israel and Syria as a first step towards normalization. Those discussions had previously been showing significant progress. In recent days, there have been clashes between Druze militia and a Bedouin gang in the city of Suwayda in southern Syria. And there has been sporadic violence between members of the two minority groups since Bashar al-Assad was toppled in December and replaced by ex-militant Ahmad al-Shara. This, of course, goes back way before the fall of the Assad regime. But when the Syrian government sent in tanks to try to restore order, the Israeli Air Force attacked those tanks. The U.S. officials said Syria had notified Israel in advance about the tanks and said its response was not directed at Israel. But Israel officials claim the tanks entered a zone that Israel, which is occupying illegally parts of western Syria, has demanded be demilitarized of heavy weapons. And over the past 24 hours, clashes continued in Sueda between Druze, the Bedouins, militias affiliated with the Syrian government and Syrian security forces. According to the Syrian Human Rights Observatory in London, very problematic organization, by the way, at least 250 people have been killed. However, this is a big however. A senior U.S. official said U.S. intelligence does not show any involvement of the Syrian government in atrocities in Suwayda. Okay, well, if the U.S. intelligence line is that, I'm sure it didn't happen. And then the U.S. official said the Israeli government told the Trump administration it sees what happened in Suwayda as October 7th-like attack on the Druze community. Okay, so basically everything was going swimmingly. Normalization was going steadily. Not really at all. Qatar and Turkey paid off Syria's loan to the World Bank so it can take out an even bigger debt trap loan and start the multi-year process of getting into the SWIFT banking system. So I guess, why would Israel do this now? The only reason I see, and it's not really a rational one politically, is to use minority communities as an excuse to seize more land and further degrade the military and civil infrastructure of the new government, which actually doesn't serve its regional political interests, I don't think, unless your overriding goal is a messianic vision of a greater Israel. So first, Robert, what do you think is going on with these strikes? What were the purpose, and what did they actually achieve?
Well, we could track this back to 2013 when the Israelis hatched a plot essentially to expand their buffer zone in southern Syria. They wanted to expand the territorial domination that they have in the Golan Heights region. And then they sought to use the Druze as a minority group as a buffer state of sorts, a rump state, which then would be allied with the Israelis. And in order to do this, at the same time as they were putting forth these drafts, which they worked with the Jordanians and the Americans on back in 2013, and these, proposals for an extended buffer zone had been going on for decades, of course, after Israel formally annexed the Golan Heights in 1981. But they also started backing around a dozen armed groups in the south of Syria that were opposition to Bashar al-Assad. And so simultaneously, while they were making inroads with the Druze, or attempting to make inroads with the Druze, what they were doing was backing militant groups, some of whom were affiliated with Al-Qaeda and Daesh, including, by the way, al-Nusra, which now we know as Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which runs the Syrian government today. It rebranded, changed somewhat, changed its orientation slightly. Still, many of its people have the same mentality, but the Israelis backed it at the same time that it was working with Daesh, and the same time that it was killing the Druze minority. So essentially what it did all the way back from 2013 was that the Israelis were planning to play both sides. That was their goal. Ultimately, they don't care who's in power. They don't care who's fighting who. They don't care what minority is killing what minority. They don't care about Sunni sectarianism or Druze sectarianism. They want them to fight each other so that they can dominate the south of Syria. So bringing this up to today, it's a very similar strategy. They back certain separatist movements in the south. They started a new strategy in 2020 where they started backing, along with the US forces in Al-Tanf, this group called the Syrian Al-Liwa Party, which sought to create an alliance with the US-backed forces in Al-Tanf in order to take over the south of Syria and create a Druze state that was based, and it was looking as well to combat Iranian-backed groups in the south of Syria. Now, a lot of those groups are still there. In the final years of the Syrian government of Bashar al-Assad, the country collapsed into economic ruin. There was a lot of embezzling, a lot of the Captagon trade was rampant. And so these gangs flourished. So you've got just an endless supply of militants to draw from, to fund, to get to do your dirty work inside of Syria. And at the same time now, the Druze civilian population are threatened by sectarian death squads, which exist throughout the country. And then you have the Syrian government now, led by Ahmad al-Shara, formerly Jolani, and he's not capable of controlling his forces. And a lot of people have a debate over this, but I think it's very clear right now. They struck a ceasefire agreement with the Druze spiritual leadership yesterday, and still the Bedouin tribes are still capturing villages in Sueda right now, in the Sueda province. And then the Druze separatist groups, there's reports of them killing civilians and ethnically cleansing Bedouins. We don't know what is completely correct in terms of the reports coming out. There's reports of all different massacres, some of which are confirmed, some of which are not. But the Syrian government doesn't have control over the country, essentially. It's a series of militant groups, foreign fighters, tribalists all over the country, which essentially have, even if there's Syrian security forces there from the new security apparatus, which when this new government came in, it wiped the old security apparatus, it disbanded the Syrian Arab army, and then formed its own. The people with the power in a lot of these areas, like Sueda, are the locals. They have militia forces, the same as in Dara. And the same was the case in the coast as well, which led to these massacres of the Alawi a few years ago.
And so, Ahmad, over at Prop & Co, you talk a lot about messaging and stuff, especially with regards to this, looking at a lot of the government aligned channels and influencers and bloggers, journalists, if you want to call them. There's definitely not this sense that, Israel is trying to do, or Western powers are trying to do this divide et impera, divide and rule strategy. I just wanted to play one clip and then get your response to it. This is from Celine Kassem. She is a former Syria diaspora blogger who's now back in Damascus.
Umayyad Square in the heart of Damascus, where Israel has been relentlessly bombing since the morning. It's also been bombing since yesterday, Daraa, Sueda, the suburbs of Damascus, and continuing to break international law as it does in Syria and all over the region. Israel is doing this at a time where Syria is trying to gain its sovereignty, to gain its ground to start building our country. But we won't be able to do so when this continues to happen and when there are external factors coming in to pretend like they want to protect minorities or to pretend something that they definitely are not going to do and they do not do. And you can ask anyone from...
So this is like pretty good right now, but it's about to take a sharp left turn.
all of these sects, and they will tell you that Israel will not protect them and is playing on this game to continue its war, its endless war in the region. As someone from the Golan Heights, we know very well that the Assad family was the best and most supportive protector to Israel and Israel's existence all of those years, ever since Hafiz Assad came into power, and the reason as to why he came into power. So today, when the Assad family is gone, this is what happens, and this is what upsets them and continues to aggravate them in their occupational nature and the way that they are.
This is not the first time I've heard this idea as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's complete nonsense, with all due respect to her and the other Syrians that, they were upset with Bashar al-Assad. They had plenty of reasons to be. And now they're kind of idealistic and hopeful and romanticizing this idea of, rebuilding the Syrian state. But they're using this excuse or this idea that they're being bombed by Israel now as like some sort of evidence that they haven't been collaborating with the Zionists when they are. And the reason why they're being bombed is because Israel is exerting their influence and establishing themselves as top dog in Syria now. And that's why, Syria doesn't have any air defenses. And so Israel can do whatever it pleases. And you always see these false reports where they say Turkey's about to, enforce a no-fly zone, or Turkey has an entire squadron of fighter jets are about to intercept Israeli jets above the skies of Damascus. That's not going to happen. And Turkey just recently arranged, a day before all this chaos ensued, they arranged a meeting between Syria and Israel in Azerbaijan. And in Azerbaijan, they were discussing, just relations between them. And to Syria's credit, they said, we're not ready to normalize. We want to focus on this 1974 agreement, which is delusional and naive because Israel obviously doesn't respect who they're negotiating with. That's why they met with them. And then a few days later, we're bombing them in order to support, armed militants that don't want to be part of the central government. So they're undermining their territorial integrity, undermining the security of the state and the power of the state, and they did that just after meeting them. So they're bombing them to send a very clear message. And it worked. The security forces were forced to retreat back to Damascus with their tail between their legs. And I say that bluntly. I know that if they're, Syrians that are supportive of the new government that hear this might not like it, but it is what it is. I don't think we can keep our head in the sand about it anymore. The Syrians are like surprised and enraged because from their perspective, they're like, we've been making concession after concession after concession to the Israelis. This is proof that they're genocidal. It's like, well, you should have known that from the beginning, and you shouldn't have been making these concessions in the first place. You've been arresting Palestinian resistance. You've been allowing genocidal rabbis who support the genocide in Gaza to come to Damascus. You give Eli Cohen's belongings, the worst traitor in Syria's history, an Israeli Mossad agent that deeply penetrated and infiltrated the Syrian government. He's one of the Mossad's most prized spies, and he undermines Syria's interests, and they give his belongings back to the Israelis. They welcome Zionist businessmen like Jonathan Bass to come and negotiate energy deals so that they can profit off of Syria's resources. So they make all these concessions, and then they're surprised when Israel still doesn't respect them. It's because they only respect power and force, and you're not willing to go to war with them. I'll say this, I'll concede that Syria isn't in a position to really fight Israel. Jolani could be assassinated at any moment. So it's not surprising that he would not necessarily, join the resistance and fight them. But I think it's time to just be honest about what's happening and wake up to the reality. And so those are my thoughts on her comments.
So the thing is, like, Jolani or al-Shara, whatever you want to call him, depending on your political affiliation or stance, it basically seems to me, looking at his whole career based off interviews he's given, I think one of the most telltale comments he's ever made was, I joined al-Qaeda to, quote, learn new skills and get involved in politics. And I do believe that, we could call him an ex-militant. I don't think that political ideology is necessarily useful for him anymore. But, he wants access to political power. It seems to be the driving force behind his entire career and his entire life. And he's ideologically mutable. He can change in order for his own survival. And it just seems, Robert, I like your thoughts, like this is just him, all these concessions he's giving with Syria, him basically folding to Western foreign policy objectives is just more of that.
Well, that's the route he's gone down. He's seeking the approval of the West, and he's trying to appease the Israelis at every single turn. An Israeli journalist, a prominent Israeli journalist, just the other day commented for the Washington Institute for Near East Policy that Ahmad al-Shara, his government, set up communication with the Israelis less than 3 days after entering Damascus. So clearly it was a priority to open up discussions, if this is true, with the Israelis. It's one of the first things that they did. We had the statements coming out from the new Syrian leaders from the very first week, as soon as they got into power, that they were not going to contest Israel. In the case of the mayor of Damascus, that he was seeking normalization with the Israelis. And so what we see now is they don't really know what to do. Ahmad al-Shara, yesterday, he appeared for a speech. He spoke for 5 minutes after hundreds and hundreds of his soldiers had been blown up by Israeli airstrikes, and his own people are in the streets calling for retaliation, but he can't do anything because he's completely beholden to his Western handlers, essentially. That's what's happened here, because he sought the economic route. He's like, well, maybe if we do what Sudan did after the overthrow of Bashir, and we get the sanctions dropped, we get off our terrorist designations, and we get sanctions relief and all of this, then suddenly we can recover as a country and we can at least revive the country economically. But while he's trying to do that, he's got a myriad of militant groups which he cannot control. And a lot of people say that that's an excuse for him. I don't think it's an excuse. Even his forces within what is the Syrian armed forces right now, when they were sent to Sueda. And by the way, a lot of people on the pro-government side are arguing that the Druze started it all. I acknowledge there are Druze separatist movements, there are Druze sectarian militias, but they didn't start it. There was a kidnapping on July 11 by Bedouin tribesmen who kidnapped a Druze trader who was traveling to Damascus. Then there was an ambush on a checkpoint, and things basically exploded from there. But also look what happened in that scenario. In Deir ez-Zor, tribal forces in Deir ez-Zor jumped on pickup trucks and hence headed straight for Sueda, talking about killing the Druze. That was what they were talking about. They're there with their scissors talking about chopping off their mustaches. And for the Syrian government right now, it's not actually a good look for them to do this. When they sent their forces originally into northern Sueda, I think probably Ahmad al-Shara probably wanted them to calm it down because he knew the Israelis were going to commit these airstrikes. The reason why the Israelis are committing the airstrikes, by the way, are twofold. Number one, it does want to expand its territory, and it does want to work with the Druze to form sort of a rump state in the south. But also, it has to appease its own Israeli Druze population who protest on the street, and they want there to be Israeli intervention on their behalf. So Ahmad al-Shara sends his men from Damascus. They're not enough. Then they start siding with the Bedouin forces and committing sectarian war crimes, according to all of the reports on the ground. Then the Druze mobilize. Then suddenly Julani has to send more of his men from Damascus. He tries to send special forces units, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work because many of these men they're sectarian militiamen. It's not yet a formal army. We can't even think about Syria and the Syrian state as what we thought about it before during the civil war. We can't think of Syria as the same entity. It's not anymore. And then that allows and open the door for groups from Idlib to come down as well. So basically you have all of these different groups, including foreign fighters, people who are sectarian, and they're sectarian death squads, essentially, who came in and are going to obviously commit massacres against civilians. And that's been documented. We don't know all of the cases, whether they're true or not, because, there's a lot of lies when these sort of tensions arise, as happened in the coast. Some of the cases we heard were not true, but they killed thousands of civilians, and there's no dispute over that. And it's not even a good thing for the Syrian government for this to happen. Just logically, it doesn't make sense for them to do it. But that's what happens when you've got 30,000 men who were just part of Al-Qaeda-linked groups, who are not properly trained, who are not disciplined, who are extremely ideological, and then you send them into minority areas. So I think what we're seeing here is that they're surprised because they coordinated, according to Axios News, the Syrians coordinated the entrance of tanks into Sueda, but then Israel bombed them anyway. And all these people are getting up and they're like, oh, well, Israel's bombing, and this proves that somehow, we must be fighting them. Well, they just killed hundreds of your troops and you haven't moved. They've been invading your country for months and months now. They've taken over key water resources, occupied villages, ethnically cleansed villages, and nothing. They bomb Damascus every other week, and there's literally no response, which is the exact same thing these people were accusing Bashar al-Assad of doing, not responding, when for years he didn't respond to Israeli airstrikes throughout Syria. But at least back then, they wouldn't invade. There were red lines. But now they can get away with anything because Israel understands Syria is weak. That was its plan all along, to weaken Syria, to basically do whatever it wants with it. And then you have a government which is incapable of controlling the forces it's aligned with, uniting the country. And now it can't even manage this situation. Like, even though it had agreements with the Druze, and it has agreements and it works in security coordination with the Israelis. So it's a mess. It's a complete mess. And we're not even getting into what happened with the Kurds and the agreement struck with them and the lack of initiative there on part of the Syrian government to implement that. It's just everywhere you turn in Syria, it's chaos. And then we have the rise of groups like Daesh again, because they are coming back. They are resurging and threatening to come back in a major way. And there's also been a number of plots to assassinate Ahmad al-Shara at this point too. So I don't even see Syria at this point as a country yet. It's trying to become a country, I guess, but it's not a country. We can't look at it as the Syria we once knew. That's gone. We're back to like 1949 when the CIA overthrew the Syrian government, and there was over a decade of chaos, and things really didn't begin to stabilize until the 1960s. That's sort of where we're at right now.
And Ahmad, when you monitor discourse about this online, and I know that's the most access we can get to what people are thinking, the accounts they follow and stuff like that. Is there any sort of discussion about how these other countries play into it, Turkey, Qatar, the United States, or is it just solely fixed on Israel? Because that would be very beneficial to U.S. plans within the region if they just only solely focused on Israel, not the other players on the board.
Could you clarify your question a little further?
Yeah. So I guess we were talking about messaging and stuff around this and trying to find a more unifying narrative. Are you seeing any accounts within Syria that are friendly towards the government mention any other players right now beyond Israel?
Yeah, there wasn't a Syrian. I believe there was a Qatari influencer. I'll have to find the tweet and send it to you. But he was pointing out that the Gulf states need to take a firm stance and stand behind this new Syrian government. And if they don't, then they really risk emboldening Israel to do even more. And eventually this will, expand, and this conflict will just spread, and it will enter other countries as well. And so, yeah, there is that kind of discourse. I think people are slowly starting to wake up and be disappointed in Turkey because they felt like, there were all these promises that Turkey was going to establish a base, and that Turkey would provide air defense, and that Turkey would provide fighter jets to protect Syria. And it's very clear that they can't and they won't do that because they're not willing to, risk the relationship they have with Israel, because they do have a sort of de facto alliance with Azerbaijan and Turkey. Israel likes Turkey staying busy in Central Asia, and they're happy to see them expand there as long as they don't expand in the Middle East or in Syria and other places. And so they kind of have a de facto alliance. Everybody knows that Azerbaijani oil goes to Israel through Turkey. And so, Turkey got what they wanted, which was like a little tiny buffer zone in the north of Syria, just in case they need to bump heads with a Kurdish state. But, that clock is ticking. That's going to come, as Robert has like very excellently laid out. Syria is, I don't know if I can curse, but it's,
Yes, you can.
Okay. Well, it's a clusterfuck. And it's going to get worse. And the whole point is to establish a micro buffer Druze state between them and this new Syrian state. They're going to establish, everyone knows about this David corridor, or they're starting to learn about it, which stretches from, occupied Palestine, Israel, basically, the Suwayda area, all the way to Iraq, and the El Tanf US bases in the middle of that. And so they have like this land and military, this airspace corridor where Israeli fighter jets don't need permission. They'll just fly over and go straight to Iran to bomb them. They'll have a land route in order to provide weapons to the Kurds so that they can establish a proxy conflict in Iran. And yeah, basically they're laying the groundwork for both Iraq and Syria to be carved up. And the point is to help establish autonomous governments and institutions, particularly for the Kurds. So in preparation for the establishment of an independent state. And so they start with autonomy. So they made this agreement with the Syrian state. They're technically part of the Syrian state, but how are they actually, what control does the Syrian state have over them? They have nothing. They govern themselves. They police themselves. They have their own military. They control the territory. They control the checkpoints. Syrian forces can't go without permission, and they're very rarely allowed to enter anyway. And when they do, you have clashes and kidnappings and fights. And it's the last thing that Jolani wants. So Robert's right. Syria isn't really a state. And that is going to become more and more clear. I was surprised to see sanctions get lifted in such a short amount of time. But now
I think it really telegraphs U.S. intentions within the region.
The lifting of the sanctions, you mean?
Yeah, so quickly.
Yeah, well, on top of that, I think it's just they know that they'll lift sanctions, but it'll still be chaos, and there won't be a lot of investment going in there anyway. So the Israelis don't have to worry about all of a sudden they're getting pumped, because there's going to be so much instability that, who's going to want to invest in Syria right now? It's going to be decades before you can have any serious investment. I mean, Iraq is a shit show, and it's been a shit show for over 2 decades now, and it's going to continue to be a shit show. There are very slow moving projects, and you're not even talking about whether all the different groups in Syria agree, right? Like if you want to establish oil infrastructure in Syria, everyone wants a piece of the pie. They argue over that. They fight over that. There's corruption. There's delays. There's payoffs. There's bribes. That's it. Syria is a defunct state. That's what they always wanted. And so I think more and more Syrians are going to wake up to that. I was speaking to Dr. Fuad Izzadi from Iran today, from Tehran University, and he said that Iran, basically their position is to wait it out, and that they think at some point there will naturally be local Syrian resistance forces that take up resistance themselves, because they'll realize the Syrian government is incapable and unwilling. And so we'll see how the discourse continues, but we are seeing more and more people kind of complain about Turkey and wonder, what the Gulf's intentions are. And now I think they're fully awake to the idea that Israel definitely intends nothing good for them.
And I wanted to remark once on like foreign intervention in terms of their like natural resources. There's not even enough stability within Syria to actually start like the real time like exploitation process. I'm just going to bring this article up from earlier this month. This is from Reuters from June 2nd. For Syria, Qatar's $7 billion, and also Turkey's involved in this, and the U.S. is in some sort of like energy consortium in Syria. $7 billion power plan hinges on fixing its grid. And Damascus, June 2nd, Reuters. Qatar's pledged to help war-torn Syria rebuild, but its $7 billion plans for new power plants will mean little unless Damascus can stop armed gangs from looting power cables faster than the cash-strapped government can fix them. The deal announcement last week by an international consortium led by Qatar's UCC Holdings promises to massively expand Syria's generation capacity, and it marks Syria's biggest foreign investment announcement since President Donald Trump unexpectedly announced the lifting of U.S. sanctions on Damascus last month. So, it's not even stable enough to get these projects going.
No, and I think as well that's part of the reason why they lifted the sanctions so quickly, because there is a threat to the current government's rule. I think people are not happy with the way things are going in general. All the people I speak to in Syria are, even some of the people that were very positive at the start, and they were cautious, of course, but they believe that things could go in a more positive direction. They're saying that, for instance, if you go to some villages surrounding Homs and Hama, there's people that used to go to the masjid, to the mosque, to pray their 5 prayers. Each of the 5 prayers they prayed every single day in the masjid. They go only to the Jummah prayer, which is on a Friday. Now, they don't bother going for the other prayers because the people that have been put inside their mosques are extremists who are wanting to preach a way of life that is not congruent with Syrians and the Syrian way of understanding Islam and Syrian society.
Wait, were these the government appointed imams that they were sending out?
Yeah, they had them, and then they have others as well. Like, you will have these people that, for instance, just go into the streets with loudspeakers, and they call it dawah, and they're going off at Christians, and they're going off at other Sunni Muslims and telling them how to dress and how to, practice their faith and everything. And people don't want these Salafists in the street telling them what to do, especially from other countries. They've never seen these people before, especially if you go to cities like Damascus, where they're not like super conservative religious people in many areas in Damascus. So the way that they've been forced to live now, and the new rule that's come, of course, they're not just, it's not like Afghanistan there. That would be an incorrect portrayal. But there's frequent kidnappings. People are getting shot dead in the streets frequently, all the time. People disappear. People's wives are stolen and trafficked off to Idlib. And there's confirmed stories of these. You get many different horror stories, and it's hard to decipher through them. But once you get so many of them from so many different sources, and as well friends telling you about them too, I don't think all of these are lies. There's just so much that is constantly coming through every single day, whether it's sources or I see it through media sources. It's insanity what's going on, and there's no stable situation for the people there. And I think that, combined with the fact that, there's a lot of people that brag about the value of the Syrian currency. Well, the Syrian currency is getting better, and there's some investments coming in. People don't care when they don't have jobs anymore, because before, they laid off loads of government employees when this new government came in. So before, people would get a salary and it would buy them nothing, and now they have no salary. So it doesn't matter what the value of the Syrian currency is. At the end of the day, you still can't live properly. Oh, well, there's some more electricity, but that's not enough for the people, especially with all of the sectarian tensions that are going on as well. That's another thing that pressures people. So they're working, the Americans especially coming there, they're working to try and recover the economy somewhat, which they won't be able to do overnight. And we saw how that played out in Sudan. There's a model that just happened a few years ago where we see exactly what happens when you have all of these different groups opposing each other and a power struggle that's ongoing inside of your country. And amidst that, you go full swing to the West. You want to get your IMF loans. You want to get your sanctions lifted and off of these terrorist lists and everything. You go and you seek normalization with the Israelis, and you get on board with their so-called Abraham Accords. And then suddenly you're exactly where you began. The Israelis are trying to plunge your country into civil war. In the case of Sudan, they backed both sides at the start. Now the government is sort of allied itself with Iran in Sudan, but they backed both the army and the rapid support forces in Sudan. The Israelis backed both sides. One side was backed by the Mossad, the other side backed by the Israeli Foreign Ministry. And the same thing is in Syria here. They have communication with the Syrian government. They're allied with the Syrian government on some security coordination issues. They're trying to draft some sort of an agreement with them. But at the same time, simultaneously, they're backing separatist militia groups that will go and take them out and kill their own forces. And then you have the people who are living in, and I don't blame them. Because if you're a Syrian and you accept what has happened to your country, like many people I now know, many Syrians, they're devastated. They're absolutely devastated on both sides, whether they were supporters before of keeping Bashar al-Assad in power, or they were supporters of the opposition. Both of them, when they come to this realization, they become devastated because they realize what has happened to their country. They realize how their country has fallen apart. And they realize that that vision that they had, that revolutionary vision that they had, is gone. Those principles that Syria used to stand for, like standing behind the Palestinian cause, for instance, like wanting to fight to retake its territory in the Jolan, that's gone. It's gone now, at least for now. There is a possibility, and I will note this, and this is something I think that people should know from history. In southern Lebanon, when the Israelis invaded in 1982, some of the Shia population, and this is really hard for people to imagine now, some of the Shia population came and threw rice at their feet. And they were happy that they came in. And there were people in the Shia population in southern Lebanon who believed that the PLO had a state within a state, and they didn't like that, and they wanted the PLO removed. There were people in the south like that, right? And the Shia population was not the Shia population of South Lebanon that we know today. They are now, after the invasion of 82, the massacre of between 15 to 20,000 Lebanese and Palestinians, and then afterwards, after the PLO did disarm to a certain extent and moved to Tunisia and left the camps open after those massacres like Sabra and Shatila, which affected the Shia as well in the south. Suddenly they transformed into the most revolutionary anti-Israel population that you could imagine, and Hezbollah was born. So this is something that we can't predict what will happen in the future. We can't just say Syria is dead. In fact, the Israelis could mess up and they could invade Syria, and they could get bogged down in a fight against certain militant groups who won't stop fighting them. And they could have a Vietnam-style situation, which they don't want. They desperately don't want ground diversion because they know they can't sustain it at this time due to their military, their ground forces being significantly weakened. But there is still hope that something will emerge in the future.
Right. And so this actually brings me to Ahmad, one of Ahmad's things that he posted. Was it yesterday or the day before? 1 second.
Yeah, it was yesterday.
Hang on. Where is it? Yeah. We're opening up with some Kissinger-esque stuff. There are no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, only permanent interests. Jelani's a shrewd operator. He flirted with Israel about common enemies, but what did it get him? Bombs on Damascus. He can and should flip sides. It's time to allow weapons to flow back to Hezbollah and Lebanon and open up a front on yourself and apply pressure on Israel separately, but at the same time, the region needs to stop allowing Israel to fight them one-on-one. I mean, yeah, this is all like good, but honestly, allowing arms to flow back into the south of Lebanon, I'm not sure that's going to happen now, do you?
No, it's not going to happen at all. And that's why people are in the comments calling me idealistic and wishful and naive. I'm aware of, the high probability that it will not happen. But I do think that, to Robert's point, just like how Hezbollah was born out of the occupation of the South, there's the potential to see that in Syria. And, whoever Jolani or Ahmad al-Shara, whatever you want to call him, whoever he's been coordinating with in order to sustain his position, at the end of the day, if the pressure is great enough, from the bottom up, he'll either have to be removed or he'll pivot himself. And, I think if I am going to continue to be idealistic and wishful, I'm going to just say that my hope is that the region can understand that their security, they depend on each other for security, and they need to stop undermining one another and start supporting and uplifting one another and presenting a true front against the state of Israel and resisting them. And if they don't want to do so militarily, that's fine, but they can do so economically, politically, diplomatically. We haven't seen that in the region at all. We haven't seen it from Jordan. They've allowed food, goods, supplies. While Israel starves Gaza, Jordan feeds Israel. While Gaza has no power and electricity, Turkey fuels Israel. While the Houthis blockade the Red Sea in order to put pressure on Israel, Saudi and the UAE allowed trade routes, all the way up through Jordan to keep feeding and supplying Israel. So we haven't really seen an attempt to try and stop Israel from not only carrying out their genocide, but expanding their violence all across the region. So my idealistic and naive hope is that the region will come together, including Iran, because Iran has demonstrated that, you know, their interests are strictly in confronting Israel's aggression. And that was the whole point for their involvement in Syria. The whole point was to, you know, people want to make it about Shia conquest of Sunni lands. You know, I don't want to suggest that there aren't sectarian extremists and things of that nature, but, you know, this was strictly geopolitical. So my hope is that the realignment in the region will see all of these nations align their geopolitical interests with one another. So there is no need to engage in proxy conflict in order to one-up each other and gain influence over each other in order to feel more safe and secure. And I'm hoping that in Syria, after 14 years of conflict and the Syrian population increasingly being, having animosity and hatred of Iran, that they begin to see one another as needing each other in order to fight off the real cancer in the region, which is the state of Israel. And I think there's an opportunity for that. And I think, you know, whether people want to believe in that or not doesn't matter. If it really is in everyone's interest, and I think it'll force itself naturally. And so we might see that in the coming years. I don't know how or when that'll play out, but that's my hope.
Yeah, you know, I do think there's some comfort in the fact that no matter how you cut it, U.S. global dominance and power projection it's irrevocably on the decline. You know, the war with Iran, the 12-day war with Iran, you know, was a PR success if you're like in MAGA world, or you're like a war hawk in DC, like at the Saban Institute or something like that. But anyone who's serious about this knows that it did not go well. That was only the first cycle of violence that we'll see. They're trying to ramp up and figure out what the next manifestation to armed conflict and confrontation with Iran will be. But this actually kind of brings in Lebanon. And at the last segment, I think we need to address what's happening there, because we're seeing a lot of the same dynamics. We're seeing the U.S. and Israel come in to try to pressure the President Aoun and the Lebanese government to demilitarize Hezbollah. You're also seeing Turkey in the north trying to gain influence and de facto control over critical infrastructure. There's a airstrip up there, and there's the deepwater port of Tripoli, and also like Saudi is involved as well in an influence battle at the ballot box within the Lebanese government. So it's kind of like a similar situation, obviously completely different demographics and history and stuff like that, but it's the same kind of playbook. This divide et impera, use IMF relief, because of course in Lebanon, they need a lot of foreign investment and aid to rebuild what Israel destroyed. And so that's being leveraged with the government as well. And, you know, the French are involved. So I think, like, I don't know, maybe we should discuss that as well, because it's all part of the same playbook and plan for like a pan-Arab normalization with Israel to secure the entire region for things like the IMEC corridor and a bunch of long-standing trade and business deals that have been in the works for a long time.
Well, I think what they're doing with Lebanon will inevitably lead, if the Lebanese government would be so stupid as to implement the demands of the United States, would lead to civil war. And that's also a threat which comes from some of these militant groups which are operating in Syria, which have not been in any way restrained, which could join in on such a fight and destabilize all of Lebanon. I believe that at this stage, I don't think the Syrian forces are capable of taking over Lebanon or something like this. I just don't think they're powerful enough. I mean, there's some reports saying up to 2,000 of them were just killed in Sueda. I don't know if that's correct exactly, but between 700 to 2,000 of them were just killed. So I don't exactly think that they could take on Lebanon, but they could cause a problem. And definitely if they had some cells inside of Lebanon, they could cause a lot of instability. And there are, of course, Jaja's men of the Lebanese forces, which could also pose some kind of threat. And Hezbollah at this time, it's very clear that it has to launch some sort of armed action in the future in order to restore its prestige and again to liberate the south of the country, at least to stop the airstrikes and the frequent Israeli incursions into their territory, which they've not been able to do. They've left this all to the Lebanese army, and the Lebanese army, as everybody knows, will never fire a single bullet in the direction of the Israelis. It's sort of similar to how the Syrian military now would never fire a bullet towards the Israelis. It's only the resistance that will do that. In the case of Syria, the resistance, if it tries to rise, it's cracked down upon. But Hezbollah is still very strong. It's lost a portion of its arsenal. It's lost its senior leadership. Supply lines. There are still weapons that are coming in over the Syrian border because, again, Syria is not a state as it was before. There's a lot of different groups that will sell weapons over the Lebanese border, that will smuggle weapons for money. And there's a lot of weapons in Syria. So there's still stuff coming in. But those advanced, precision missiles and things like that, they're not going to be coming in unless Iran has some method we don't know about in delivering them. But Hezbollah still has a force of around 100,000 fighters. It still has all the weapons, the light weapons that it needs to fight the Israelis on the ground. And so, in my opinion, Hezbollah doesn't actually need these precision, these long-range or medium-range precision missiles. I think that was there as a deterrent in the past. I think that those weapons were there as a deterrent, and they believed, and this was sort of the model that Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah had set up, they believed that there was a level of deterrence against the Israelis. After October 7, as has been admitted now by Israeli officials, Israel is a different country. It's not the same anymore. It's a different entity. It doesn't think the same. It doesn't operate the same. In my opinion, the Israel we knew before doesn't exist anymore. This is a position that I've had for some time. I think now that Iran and Hezbollah and the likes and Hamas and everybody have sort of accepted that now this is an existential war, an existential threat, and the Israelis are operating under a different mindset where there is no deterrence. Nobody has deterrence anymore against anyone. The Israelis will act based upon interest and what they perceive as being an attack that will not beget considerable consequences. I think they miscalculated when it came to Iran. However, their strikes on Lebanon were definitely devastating. But in the future, I foresee that we will have some sort of conflict between the Israelis and Hezbollah. But I don't expect Hezbollah to operate in the way that it did before, where it is quite strategic and reserved. I think what you're seeing brew, especially in the South Lebanese population, is a desire for a different kind of war, a different kind of attack, a different kind of offensive, which will not, in my opinion, need these precision weapons. It will need light weapons for it to happen. But it just depends upon that situation in southern Lebanon and what is the perfect circumstance for Hezbollah to act. Right now, it's not within their interest to open up the war once again when they don't have a goal. They don't know what they're doing. They're just fighting for the sake of defense. If that's the case, you can keep fighting the Israelis. They can't win on the ground, but you are not going to achieve anything. So I think we're going in that direction. Meanwhile, the Israelis are attempting, and the U.S. is attempting to stir chaos inside of Lebanon because they would love a situation where Lebanon looks exactly like Syria. That's their dream scenario, and they are working towards it.
Yeah. I made an episode about this like almost 2 years ago, how they've been trying to do this and put actors in place to effectuate this within certain armed groups and militias outside the sphere of Hezbollah within Lebanon for some time. And I guess finally, in the end, this belligerent Israeli policy. It's been empowered by U.S. political and military cover for the past 2 years. The state policy of bombing hospitals is fine now. Why not bomb military buildings? It's just kind of accepted now that this is what's going to happen. And if you don't get in line, you're just going to get bombed into oblivion. I'm wondering, like, what your thoughts, Ahmad, on this general like policy and if it will eventually like backfire.
Well, the Israelis have always been hell bent on achieving their goal of expansion. They need a buffer for their territory. And they also just view themselves, religiously, politically, they view themselves as the superior civilization, the superior race. And they want to manifest that. And they want to come out of the closet as the hegemon. They want all the Arab states to come out of the closet as collaborators. They want to make it clear that they're top dog and they're in charge. And while Israel is an extension of U.S. imperialism, they also sort of dictate U.S. foreign policy in the region now. And so there's a conflict of interest, and they oftentimes will bump heads and do things that are not in the U.S.'s interest. The U.S.'s strategy in every region of the world is divide and conquer. They need everyone to be on par with one another. They don't necessarily like one nation having more influence. I mean, even in Europe, they didn't really like the idea that Germany was going to be this vastly superior economy and dominate the European Union by having these pipelines with Russia where they got cheap fuel to power their economy. So what they do, they blew it up, even though it hurt Germany. But that served their interests to an extent because, and then Patrick Henningsen talks about this. But yeah, I mean, they wanted to ensure that Europe remains divided, but no nation can overtake the other so that they can better control it. Well, in the Middle East, they're kind of contradicting this policy by allowing Israel to become stronger and stronger and stronger and coming out as, a potential regional hegemon, which they're very close to. They haven't fully established yet, but this is what they're moving towards. So there's a conflict of interest in terms of the U.S. policy and what Israel's goals are. But, this is what Israel wants to achieve. They've been talking about this since the very beginning. And October 7th is this juicy lemon that they keep squeezing and beating in order to get as much lemon juice out of. And it doesn't just stop with Gaza and dumping, eventually they will ethnically cleanse Gaza fully. They will, annex the West Bank, potentially, dump them into Jordan and parts of Syria, maybe even. And they're, looking to have another round with Iran and just continuously expanding their interests. So this is what they've always been wanting to do, and they're doing it right now. They've been doing it every day since October 7th out in the open, and they're going to continue to do so until they get everything that they want, unless the region stands, against them. Because I don't think Iran can do it alone, and I don't even know that, you can militarily defeat Israel, given that, they're a nuclear-powered state. So I don't know what their defeat looks like, and I don't know if they can even be defeated in a constructive way. It could be very destructive for everyone. But either they're confronted or they're allowed to succeed.
Right. And I guess, Robert, like, would you characterize all like their decisions, though, while incredibly violent, and yes, they're going for complete annexation and ethnic cleansing within the occupied Palestinian territories, definitely seems like it's inherently self-destructive.
I believe so. Whilst I agree with most of what Ahmad said, I disagree on the ethnic cleansing. I believe that the Israelis absolutely will get away with annexing the West Bank. I don't think there's any pushback in the West Bank. We could go into why that is. I don't see there being significant pushback. Even after the annexation, I don't see there being anything. But when it comes to Gaza specifically and the ethnic cleansing, I don't believe Israel can achieve it. And the reason why is not because they're not evil enough to achieve it. It's two reasons. Number one, I don't see them militarily being able to do it. Number one, all of their plans and schemes fail every single time they go into Gaza. This new Gideon's chariots, its wheels have fallen off. They don't know what they're doing. They were speaking for months about how wonderful the next military operation in phase 2 of their war in Gaza was going to be. And then they sent their troops in there and they started getting, IEDs thrown into their armored personnel carriers and getting sniped. And then they had no answer. They didn't know what they were doing. They always just go and invade a hospital randomly to say that we completed our mission. But the second major reason is because if you ethnically cleanse the population of the Gaza Strip, you're going to have to put them primarily in 2 neighboring countries. That's Jordan and Egypt, at the very least Egypt. So what is 1.8 million traumatized people from Gaza going to do when they reach Egypt and Jordan?
Wounded child, no surviving family.
what's going to happen in that case? It's very obvious. Many of them have military training as well. There'll be fighters that get through, of course, because you're ethnically cleansing everyone. So there's a lot of people who are policemen. They're working in the security apparatus. They're ex-Fatah people who are working with the Palestinian Authority security forces. And then you have the myriad of resistance groups operating inside Gaza, which since the wars happened, even more people are recruited into them. So you have this population, and then you just expel them into the Sinai and you expel them into Jordan. If they're in Jordan, it's very obvious what's going to happen. And the populations in those countries, even though they're not doing anything now, will not oppose that happening from their country. They won't be able to, especially in Jordan. In Jordan, there is a desire for that to happen. And the regime in Jordan covers up all of the protests. It arrests all the ringleaders. It prevents people from taking phones. If you in Jordan, you go in Jordan and you go to a protest, which are happening all the time, by the way, but we don't see them anymore. The Jordanian security forces will take away your phone and delete the footage because they don't want anything to come out. But the reality is, majority of the people in Jordan are Palestinians. And a lot of those people would be willing to get on board with resistance if it did emerge. And we've seen that before. So if you put all of these people in these countries, it's obvious what's going to happen. And even the Israelis, I guarantee that those are discussions that are happening behind closed doors. If we do this, then not only is this going to be chaos and it's going to be very costly when we try and do it, because there is always as well the possibility that Hamas and the Palestinian groups, if they see that this is going to happen, will launch a massive offensive and just not care and just go all in, because at that point, why not? And
I'll say that, I hope you're right. And, you raise a lot of correct and important things. I'll just play devil's advocate, I suppose, literally for the Israelis. But, they're aware of this, and there have been discussions that, they intend to send portions of the Palestinians from Gaza to different European countries, to Canada, to the United States. They're, already preparing to have tens of thousands of visas for every country. And the Zionists are going to use their influence, through their lobbies in these countries to solicit support for that. And it'll be presented as a humanitarian project. And this is what Trump has said. Gaza can't be lived in anymore. And it's true. Gaza cannot be lived in for God knows how long. And little by little, they chip away at what's left of the infrastructure, which is already, very little, and it's nothing. And they're destroying more and more water wells. They're trying to make it completely unlivable so that surrounding nations have no choice but to, at least take some Palestinians. And the Egyptians have created, by destroying Rafah, touching Gaza, they've created like another corridor. They've created another Gaza, the size of Gaza. And it's a concentration camp. There are walls there as well. And part of that is to establish a buffer zone. The other part of that as well, and if you look at those pictures now, there are already Palestinian refugees living like in tents in those areas. Their plan is to prepare for the inevitable I don't want to say inevitable, but for the possibility that Palestinians from Gaza are ethnically cleansed into there. And so they're preparing, a larger concentration camp. They're preparing for the security. And this is the whole point of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, to starve the population, force them further and further south. And we see, you think, well, Palestinians, maybe they'll never go south. But then every single day they risk their lives, despite knowing that they could and probably will die. But they still go because you need food at the end of the day. And there are a lot of Palestinians who, when I went to Egypt, I went on a charity project and I filmed for a nonprofit there, speaking to Palestinians from Gaza who are in Egypt. And they say that, one, they're not happy about the situation. And I'm not trying to make people pessimistic and negative, but, they don't want to go through this anymore. So there are a lot of Palestinians willing to resist and fight and die. And there are many of them that are just, they're done. They don't want to live like this anymore. And they can't be blamed for that. So it's all unfortunate. I hope you're right that it can't be done. But I think they're thinning the population through murder and starvation anyway. And I think their intention is to continue doing that and then open the floodgates and offer visas. And if you're a Palestinian who's been suffering for 2 years under genocide and you can go to Canada, and you have friends and cousins there, you'll go. So that's their plan. And I think that, there's the potential that we see that in the coming year.
Well, a portion, just to jump in there, because I have family, extended family, both in Gaza and in Egypt, who left earlier on during the war. Those in Egypt, they say that they want to go back to Gaza because the situation there sucks. Like you said, like it's just untenable. Their life sucks. There's nothing there for them. But that situation where there is a sense of hopelessness amongst the population doesn't necessarily translate into a mass migration to Canada or France or wherever else of 1.8 million people. The majority of those people, number one, it's funds. If they have family elsewhere and stuff like this, for instance, they can go. There's already hundreds of thousands of people who have left. So there are people that want to leave. There's hundreds of thousands of more people in Gaza who, when polled, say, yeah, like this is the sentiment, like of a large portion of the population. We would go somewhere if we could. However, to get them all to move to European countries so far away and to facilitate this, I don't think it's realistic. And the Israelis as well, in terms of doing that, they had the perfect opportunity to do this earlier on in the war, but they didn't do it. And they haven't been able to get away with it the entire time. And they're also not coordinated enough because their armed forces don't listen to them, listen to their own orders. They just go in and shoot and kill and bomb whoever they want, whenever they want, when they're in front of them. That's why, for instance, this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, when people go and get the aid, that's not like the Israelis getting an order to shoot. It's like, yeah, go ahead, do what you want. Like, go ahead. And they do. And they shoot people in the head and they get a buzz out of it, and they use their drones to gun them down too. And they're not professional enough to actually pull that off, in my opinion. Because every time they try, they end up like, they're like, go here, and then they bomb them there. So I don't think that they are going to do that. I think that it would destabilize Egypt because it's not just sort of like, okay, we get these Palestinians who are living, in chunks, like 20,000 today, 50,000 tomorrow, where we put them all on planes, take them for the Egyptian border, take them all on planes in a very orderly fashion to Europe and to North America. You would have to physically, because Egypt opposes the ethnic cleansing, and for a very good reason, you would have to physically force them over. So that's one step. Then the next step is, once you physically forced 1.8 million people into the Sinai, then you need to somehow organize these people, and then you need to assembly line take them out to different countries. It's just impossible. It just won't happen. In my opinion, I just don't see it happening. And a lot of those people, maybe there's hundreds of thousands of them that do want to go to European countries. They have family members everywhere, and they'll move to those countries. But I don't see it being possible to get the bulk of them to go to those countries. I just don't see it as being a possible. But I might be wrong.
I mean, with the rise of far right movements within Europe, intensely anti-immigrant, especially anti-Syrian from the Civil War specifically, and with the new ICE initiatives and deportations within the United States itself, which influences Canadian immigration policy as well, it's just a really weird, awkward political situation. And really the only conclusion is that, since it's not workable diplomatically or logistically at this stage, they're just going to try and erase and delete as many people in Gaza as possible and just keep it going. Make it 1 month to the next, one corruption trial hearing delay to the next corruption trial hearing delay. I mean, like our entire strategy right now, and when I say I include Israel in that as well, because they're a colony, but they exert unprecedented influence upon us and our own policy that's ever existed within colonial history. That's for damn sure. But when it comes to this one issue, it's basically just destabilize, play for time, exploit chaos, play for more time. And, that's what the Iranian ceasefire is. That's what the shift here is. That's what the bombing of Syria is, playing for time for Netanyahu's own legal issues. That's also a part of it. I would say that, while there are a lot of smart people within the DC Beltway and within the defense circles, there isn't really a cohesive strategy for it, how this ends. This is giving Iraq war, global war on terror. We're just going to play month to month, continue to implement policies that don't work, while at the same time trying to control the dimensions of the conflicts in Lebanon and Syria, because we don't want to deal with the immigrants. I mean, bottom line is, like, we could talk about this for hours, but it's a mess. It's an absolute mess. And I just wanted to see, like, in terms of like messaging going forward, how to approach people. Like in Syria, we know that, or in the diaspora, that there was a lot of fragmenting over the Palestine movement. And as we end here, because we're out of time, I think Ahmad you've been trying to, like, give an olive branch or try to bring more people together that were divided over the fall of the Assad regime.
Yeah, and I don't know how to do that. I haven't having a lot of success. I get mocked for it all the time.
Yeah.
But I think, like any situation in which you're trying to bring two very upset opposites towards one another, you just have to be empathetic, and you have to be willing to understand each other's perspectives. And so I think a lot of Syrians don't like being lectured to or told that you are either Zionists willingly, or you've been duped into fighting for your quote unquote freedom. Now look how free you are. Even though that might be true, right? So it's about, I think what's most important is the interests. If they're aligned, naturally people will be forced to come together again. And we see that when, even though the Axis, those who support the Axis are like, hey, look, we told you so, when Israel bombs them, at the same time, they still condemn it. And both Iran and Hezbollah put out a statement saying, we support the territorial integrity of Syria. That doesn't mean they support Jolani. That doesn't mean that they're happy this is taking place. But, they still understand that Israeli aggression needs to be stopped, right? And so I think that's naturally stronger than trying to make any kind of argument. But I think we just have to empathize and understand each other's perspectives. Why was Iran and Hezbollah interested in what they were doing in Syria? Why didn't they view the revolution as legitimate? I think it's time for Syrians that question, and vice versa. I think it's time for people who support the Axis and those who were against the revolution and understood what the CIA was up to and all these different things. I think it's time for them to also ask themselves, well, why would Syrians, be so opposed to Bashar al-Assad? What was life like for them? Can I understand their perspective or not? And if you can understand each other's perspectives and empathize one another, then you can improve your language and create more dialogue and discussion and understanding. And I don't know if that will work in the end, but that's all that I can imagine. And I think that's, kind of what I try to do, even though people might look at my tweets and say, hey, you're being a bit abrasive, but I do it, I try to be empathetic, and sometimes I have to be abrasive, but it isn't working. But I hope that it can, and I'm going to continue to try.
Yeah, agitate, educate, organize. It's not as big of a golden window of opportunity, but this bombing of Damascus, this new fresh bombing of Damascus, hopefully can provide like a sort of like window of outreach that we're seeing in America now with the disenfranchised MAGA voters over the Epstein files. It's like, yeah, we can all get behind the fact that this is wrong. So maybe we can talk about it. I don't know. But
have you seen the Dave Chappelle meme? It's like a GIF meme, but it's from his early skits. I think when he's dressed up as, is it Charlie Murphy? But he's doing the come here, like, welcome.
Yeah,
I'll send it to you. Yeah.
But, that's from the Chappelle. That's when he did Rick
Show. Yeah. I think when he was dressed up as Charlie Murphy, there's this GIF where he's like, welcoming people.
Yeah, come on in. Like, obviously, the same people that are determining bad domestic policy within the United States are the same one trying to carve up the Middle East and push for an Abraham Accords 2.0. So anyways, guys, we are super out of time. I appreciate you staying on an extra almost 15 minutes to get into this. So Syria, man, it's going to eventually calm down, or at least in terms of international headlines for a couple months, and then probably kick off again with something new. That's kind of the cycle we've been seeing since last December. So thanks so much, Ahmad from Propaganda and Company, and Robert Inlakesh here at MintPress News. Thanks, y'all. And hey, we are doing 2 shows a week. Monday's just me, where I do the whole breakdown of all the horrendous news that you missed over the weekend. And then we do the Thursday discussion episode. So hopefully you guys like, share, and subscribe and become regular viewers of that. This has been State of Play on MintPress News. Have a great weekend. Get out into your community. Try to do something social. And life does go on. We'll be here Monday to tell you every horrible thing that you missed. See y'all next week.